There are some men you marry because they feel safe. Because they don't cause storms. They don't raise their voices. They don't make your heart pound with anything other than the comfortable predictability of a shared life. That was Daniel. And then there are men who don't need to raise their voices. Men whose presence alone changes the pressure in a room. Men like Kaylin. And my mistake was thinking I could have one without the other ever finding out about the life I'd chosen. For 5 years, I told myself I was happy. Daniel was a good man. He remembered anniversaries, he helped with dishes, he had a 401k that was on track. He was the kind of man your mother tells you to stop looking for because you've already found him. But somewhere in the quiet of our suburban home, in the silence between dinner and sleep, I started to feel a strange kind of loneliness. It wasn't the loneliness of being alone. It was the loneliness of being with someone who didn't know how to look at you and see the parts of you that you keep hidden. The parts that aren't always safe. The parts that want to be challenged. Daniel saw me. But he never really looked at me. And I think, on some level, I resented him for it. The first time I saw Kaylin, he was just a silhouette in the garage of the auto body shop 2 blocks from our house. Daniel had taken his car in for a noise he couldn't identify, and I'd gone to pick him up. Kaylin was the owner. He was leaning against a tool bench, wiping grease from his hands with a red rag, and when he looked up, it wasn't a glance. It was an acknowledgement. His eyes held mine for a second longer than they should have, and in that second, I felt something crack inside the carefully constructed glass case I kept my feelings in. He was tall. Broad-shouldered. But it wasn't his build that got my attention. It was the quiet authority he moved with. The way his voice, when he said "your car's ready," was low and unhurried, like he had all the time in the world and knew you'd wait for every word. Daniel, standing beside me, suddenly looked smaller. Not in stature. In substance. He nodded at Kaylin with a politeness that bordered on nervous. Kaylin just gave a slight nod back. It was a transaction of respect, but it wasn't equal. Daniel was the one giving it. Kaylin was the one who received it without asking. Over the next few months, I found reasons to go back. A slow leak in a tire. An oil change. I told myself it was convenience, but my heart knew the truth. I wanted to be in his orbit again. I wanted to feel the weight of that gaze. Kaylin never flirted. He never crossed a line. He just talked to me, really talked to me, while he worked. He asked questions Daniel never asked. Not about my to-do list, but about my thoughts. About what I was afraid of. About the last time I felt truly alive. And I answered him. Every time. The words just fell out of me, like they'd been trapped behind a dam for years. One evening, I was there just before closing. The shop was empty, the last of the daylight painting the concrete floor orange. He was standing close, explaining something about the engine, and I wasn't listening to the words anymore. I was listening to the sound of his voice. I looked up at him, and he stopped talking. The silence that followed was louder than anything. He reached out, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, and his thumb brushed a smudge of something from my cheek. It was the gentlest touch I'd ever felt, and it ignited a fire in me that 5 years of marriage had never even sparked. And that's when we heard the door open. It was Daniel. He'd come to pick me up. He stood in the doorway, his keys in his hand, and he saw us. He saw the proximity. He saw the look on my face. For a second, I expected anger. I expected a scene. I expected him to demand to know what was going on. But he didn't. He just looked at Kaylin. And in that look, I saw something I'd never seen in my husband before. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, primal recognition. It was the look a smaller animal gives a larger one when it realizes it has wandered onto its territory. Kaylin didn't move. He didn't step back from me. He just looked at Daniel with those calm, knowing eyes. The air in the room became thick, almost impossible to breathe. It was a silent conversation between the two of them. A conversation about power. About who was capable of what. Then Kalen spoke. His voice was quiet, but it filled the entire space. He said, "Daniel. We're done here. Your wife's car is ready." He said your wife, but the way he said it, it didn't sound like a fact. It sounded like a question. A challenge. And Daniel just nodded. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked back out to the car. I followed him, my legs shaking. The drive home was a suffocating silence. I waited for him to explode, to confront me, to fight for me. But he didn't. He just gripped the steering wheel and stared at the road. And in that moment, I knew. I knew the marriage was over. Not because of what almost happened with Kalen. But because of what didn't happen with Daniel. He didn't fight. He didn't even try. He saw a man who was his equal in every way that mattered, and he retreated. A week later, I moved out. I didn't go to Kalen right away. I needed to breathe, to understand what I'd done. But a few months later, I found myself back at that shop. He was there, of course. He looked up from that same tool bench, and that same slow smile touched his lips. He didn't say "I told you so." He didn't say "I knew you'd come." He just said, "I've been waiting for you to find your way here." And I realized the truth. Daniel wasn't afraid of Kalen because Kalen was a threat. He was afraid of him because Kalen was everything he knew he wasn't. Kalen didn't need to possess me. He just needed to be himself. And in being himself, he showed me what I was missing. Sometimes, the man a woman needs isn't the one who holds on the tightest. It's the one whose presence is so undeniable that it makes every other man in the room let go first.